3 days. 3 days since they'd fled the suffocating concrete embrace of Zero's bunker, trading one form of claustrophobia for another. The battered van, more rust than paint, groaned under the strain of navigating the treacherous, snow-choked logging trails that served as roads in this forgotten stretch of the northern wilderness. Each mile felt stolen, paid for in dwindling fuel and fraying nerves. Outside, the world was a monochrome nightmare of white snow and black, skeletal trees clawing at a perpetually overcast sky. The silence was immense, broken only by the wind's mournful howl and the van's protesting engine. A silence that felt less peaceful and more like the world holding its breath. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than the biting wind outside. Lena sat pressed against the passenger door, staring out at the desolate landscape. Her silence a wall Marcus couldn't breach. The accusation she'd hurled at him back in the bunker. Was Rhea's sacrifice not enough for you? Hung between them, unspoken but palpable. He saw the resentment in the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she avoided his gaze. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the weight of leadership and the ghosts of their choices pressing down harder than the miles. In the back, Ben huddled under a thin blanket, shivering despite the van's struggling heater. His eyes darted nervously towards the windows, tracking snowflakes or perhaps phantoms only he could see. He'd occasionally flinch at the whine of the wind, muttering something unintelligible under his breath before lapsing back into a tense, watchful silence. Was it trauma, Marcus wondered, or were the whispers Ben claimed to hear in the bunker following them out here? Jack seemed almost oblivious, hunched over his reinforced tablet, miraculously salvaged and partially repaired by Oracle after the backlash, though its connection capabilities were fried. He was running diagnostics on captured ambient energy readings, comparing them against the residual code signatures from Nightingale. Faint traces. Intermittent, he murmured, tracing patterns on the screen. Different modulation? Adapting to the open environment? His obsession was a shield against the fear, but Marcus worried it was also blinding him to their immediate dangers. Oracle, ever the pragmatist, sat near the back, methodically inventorying their meager supplies. A few nutrient paste tubes left, water purification tablets running low, minimal medical gear. Their movements were precise, economical, but Marcus caught their gaze lingering on the fuel gauge, hovering dangerously close to empty. Their expression, as always, was unreadable, but the gravity of their situation needed no commentary. The immediate crisis arrived abruptly as they rounded a sharp bend. Where a sturdy wooden bridge should have spanned a deep, ice-choked ravine, there was only splintered timber and twisted metal supports. Recent snowfall partially obscured the wreckage, but it was clear the bridge hadn't just collapsed from age. It looked violently torn apart. The world outside dissolved into a sickening lurch of white and gray as Marcus slammed his foot onto the brake pedal. Metal screamed, a high-pitched tearing sound against the oppressive silence. As the worn tires lost their desperate fight with the ice hidden beneath the snow, the van became a clumsy, metal beast, fishtailing wildly, its heavy rear end swinging out with terrifying momentum towards the sheer, dizzying drop. Marcus wrestled the wheel, muscles straining. A strangled gasp caught in his throat as the abyss yawned closer, promising a final, crushing embrace. With a violent shudder that rattled their teeth, the van shuddered to a halt, mere inches from the precipice, the scent of burnt rubber and hot metal stinging the frigid air. He sucked in a ragged breath that scraped his lungs, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, staring through the crazed spiderweb patterns on the frosted windshield. Where solid timber and steel should have spanned the chasm, there was only brutal violation. Massive support beams snapped like twigs, the roadbed ripped away, leaving jagged splinters pointing accusingly at the churning, ice-gray water far below. It wasn't collapsed, it looked torn apart. God. Marcus choked out the word stolen by the wind, Zero's storm. He warned us, but even as he said it, the explanation felt thin, inadequate against the sheer violence etched into the wreckage. He tore his eyes from the immediate disaster, the symbol of their entrapment, only to find Lena utterly still beside him. She wasn't looking at the ruined bridge. Her gaze, unnervingly vacant, was fixed across the vast emptiness of the ravine, locked onto the dense, black skeletal fingers of the pine forest, clinging to the opposite cliff face. Her face, usually a mask of tightly controlled anger or weary grief, was now terrifyingly blank, as if the sight before her had wiped away all familiar emotion, leaving something cold and alien in its place. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the wind's low moan. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, devoid of inflection, almost mechanical, yet it resonated with a chilling certainty that made the hairs on Marcus's neck prickle. "That wasn't the storm," she stated, the words dropping like stones into the suffocating quiet. She didn't turn, didn't blink. Something else did this. Something wanted it broken. Her eyes remained fixed on the distant trees, seeing something in their silent, snow-dusted depths that held her utterly captive, something that radiated a wrongness far more profound than the shattered bridge. The air in the van grew colder, charged with unspoken dread, leaving Marcus desperate, terrified, to know what horror lurked within that silent forest, waiting just across the abyss. Marcus followed her gaze. High in the skeletal branches of the pines across the chasm, dozens, maybe hundreds, of crows perched silently. They weren't moving, weren't calling out. They just sat there, black shapes against the gray sky, watching. It was unnervingly still, unnatural. As he watched, a gust of wind swept through the ravine, yet the birds remained perfectly motionless, like obsidian statues. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down his spine. Oracle's gloved fingers danced with chilling precision across the hardened screen, the topographical map casting a sickly, pale luminescence that did little to warm the van's frigid interior. Red icons pulsed like angry sores over impassable mountain ranges and frozen rivers, boxing them in. "The geography offers no quarter," Oracle stated, their voice devoid of inflection, yet each word landed like a shovelful of frozen earth on a coffin lid. 50 miles radius yields only terrain this vehicle cannot traverse. We are effectively corralled. The word hung in the air, thick with the implication of a trap not set by nature alone. Oracle's gaze flickered momentarily to the fuel gauge, its needle quivering near empty, a silent testament to their dwindling options. Fuel estimates grant us 19 miles, perhaps 20 at most. A terminal diagnosis for the engine. The finality in their tone was absolute, stripping away any lingering illusions of an easy path forward. A sharp intake of breath hissed from Jax. He wasn't looking at Oracle's map of physical barriers, but at the chaotic, jagged lines screaming across his tablet, a map of something far more insidious. He hunched closer, his breath ghosting across the cold screen, eyes tracing waveforms that spiked and dipped with a rhythm that felt hideously organic, like the fevered heartbeat of something vast and diseased. "It's amplified," he stammered, the sound tight, strained, as if forcing the words past a constriction in his throat. He tapped a section where the signature coalesced into a dense, ugly knot of pulsing energy, a visual representation of the digital sickness they fled. That residual signature? The fractured code. It's not just background noise here. It's pooled, thickening. He looked up, his face slick with a sudden cold sweat despite the van's failing heater, his eyes reflecting a deep, technical horror that went beyond mere data analysis. Right at the edge of this ravine, as if it's congealed here, waiting. The implication was monstrous, not random scatter, but deliberate concentration, an ambush laid not with soldiers, but with corrupted reality itself. From the back seat, a low, strangled sound tore from Ben's throat, sharp enough to make Marcus flinch. Ben scrambled backwards, pressing himself into the corner of the seat as if trying to physically shrink away from an unseen presence, eyes wide with a terror that seemed disconnected from the immediate physical danger of the ravine. His gaze was locked on the unnerving stillness of the crows perched across the chasm, hundreds of unblinking black eyes reflecting the bleak, gray light like chips of obsidian. "It knows?" He choked out, the whisper ragged, desperate, clawing its way out of his lungs. "It knows we're here." He pointed a trembling finger, not just at the birds, but at the oppressive emptiness between them and the van, an emptiness that suddenly felt charged, watchful. "They aren't just watching, it's looking through them. I feel it." His voice cracked, dropping lower, laced with a chilling certainty. "Like the glyph. Pressing. Seeing." He squeezed his eyes shut, hands clamped hard over his ears as if trying to block out a silent scream only he could perceive, the raw terror radiating from him, making the cold in the van feel suddenly, horribly invasive, a tangible presence slithering between them. We cross on foot, Marcus decided, the words tasting like ash. Grab only essential gear. We can't risk staying here, and we definitely can't turn back. He looked at the ravine, then at the silent, watching birds, then at the faces of the exhausted, terrified survivors crammed into the dying van. The outpost was close, but the frozen road had just become infinitely longer, and the feeling of being watched intensified with every gust of the icy wind. Leaving the relative, albeit failing, shelter of the van felt like stepping naked into the maw of the wilderness. The wind sliced through their worn layers of clothing with vicious intent, carrying fine, stinging particles of ice. The silence pressed in, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the snow and Ben's ragged breathing. They salvaged what little they could. Oracle carried the core tech and sensor gear. Jax clutched the Nightingale drive and his repaired tablet. Lena took the bulk of the remaining medical supplies and nutrient paste. Ben carried extra blankets, and Marcus hefted their single rifle and emergency gear. Every item felt impossibly heavy, a burden measured not just in pounds, but in the grim reality of their isolation. The ravine crossing was a nightmare. What remained of the bridge structure was unstable, coated in treacherous ice. They were forced to descend partway down the steep, snow-covered bank, find a narrow point where fallen trees and debris formed a precarious natural bridge over the rushing, ice-choked water below, and then haul themselves up the other side. The wind howled through the chasm, threatening to tear them from their handholds. Marcus went first, securing a rope, then helped the others across one by one. Ben froze halfway down the bank, paralyzed by fear, until Lena spoke to him sharply, her voice cutting through his panic with surprising force. Jax nearly lost his footing on the icy log, spanning the gap, saved only by Oracle's quick reflexes. Grabbing the back of his jacket. Throughout the ordeal, the crows remained perched on the far side, silent sentinels watching their struggle. Once they were all safely across, Marcus glanced back. The birds hadn't moved. It felt less like observation and more like confirmation. They know we're here. The trek that followed became a brutal pilgrimage into a frozen, indifferent hell. Each upward step onto the exposed plateau felt like tearing flesh from ice, fighting against thigh-deep snowdrifts that seemed to actively grasp and pull with greedy, invisible hands, dragging them back towards the abyss of the ravine they'd barely escaped. The wind wasn't just wind, it screamed, a physical assault that scoured their faces raw, stole the breath from their lungs before they could fully draw it in, and carried with it stinging shards of ice that felt like tiny, hostile needles probing for weakness. Its constant, high-pitched howl seemed to twist around them, sometimes sounding like the mournful cries of the damned, other times like sibilant, chilling whispers just beyond the threshold of understanding, whispers that spoke of cold, of being watched, of things broken and left behind in the white emptiness. Visibility plunged into a disorienting whiteout as the clouds descended, thick and suffocating, swallowing the landscape whole, erasing landmarks, leaving them adrift in an oppressive gray void where up and down blurred into meaninglessness. They were ghosts navigating purgatory, tethered to reality only by the faint, flickering green light of Oracle's navigation device, a fragile beacon in the overwhelming storm, and the primal, desperate instinct to put one frozen boot in front of the other. Marcus watched the others through eyes narrowed against the gale, the swirling snow painting fleeting, monstrous shapes in his peripheral vision. He saw the devastating toll etched onto their frost-rimed faces, reflected in their faltering, stumbling steps. Lena moved with a frightening rigidity, her face a hidden mask beneath her ice-caked hood, each movement seeming to cost her an immense effort, as if her very spirit was freezing solid within her, leaving only brittle determination behind. Ben stumbled frequently, his eyes wide, with a terror that seemed directed not at the physical hardship, but at the swirling snow itself, muttering fragments Marcus couldn't catch, except once, a choked gasp that somehow cut through the wind's deafening roar. "It's watching." From the white. Jax plodded onward, head bowed, his focus seemingly locked on the faint, erratic energy readings his damaged tablet still managed to display amidst the interference. But the violent, uncontrollable shivering racking his thin frame betrayed the lie of his scientific detachment. Marcus felt his reserves draining rapidly into the howling emptiness, replaced by an exhaustion so profound, so bone-deep, it felt like dying slowly from the inside out. The cold wasn't just on his skin anymore. It had sunk into his marrow, a heavy leaden weight methodically extinguishing the last embers of warmth, of hope. Doubt, colder and sharper than any ice crystal, began to crystallize in his gut, a terrifying certainty growing with each agonizing step. What were they walking towards? Zero's promise of a key, a cure, or just a more elaborate tombstone buried under miles of unforgiving, watchful white? Hours dissolved into an indistinguishable torment, a relentless, grinding cycle of struggle against the wind, the snow, the crushing despair that threatened to swallow them whole. Time ceased to have any discernible meaning. There was only the burning ache in his lungs that felt like inhaling powdered glass, the screaming protest of his frozen muscles, and the hypnotic, terrifying emptiness of the swirling gray that promised oblivion. Then, as the bleak afternoon light began its final, grudging surrender to the encroaching, bruised twilight, the oppressive ceiling of cloud seemed to fracture momentarily, as if reality itself was tearing. A fleeting, ragged rift appeared in the suffocating veil, offering a brief, dizzying glimpse of the bruised, violet sky bleeding into blackness beyond. Oracle, a figure sculpted from frost and sheer willpower, stopped dead, their movement so sudden it was jarring in the monotonous, death march rhythm of their trek. They raised a hand, gloved, stiff with ice, pointing into the swirling gray chaos ahead. Their voice, when it finally tore through the wind's relentless assault, was raspy, cracked, stripped bare of its usual impassive detachment, carrying only the stark, chilling weight of grim arrival. Target acquired. Visual confirmation. Marcus squinted, following Oracle's gaze. There, nestled against the base of a looming gray mountain spur, partially obscured by swirling snow, was the outpost. It wasn't what he'd expected. No gleaming futuristic structure, but a brutalist scar upon the landscape. Low-slung, angular buildings of stained, weathered concrete, hunkered low, partially buried beneath snowdrifts, connected by covered walkways. A single, squat communications tower, dark and lifeless, jutted defiantly towards the oppressive sky. Sections of the outer walls showed dark scoring, like blast marks from an old conflict, and one wing of the main building seemed partially collapsed, its roof sagging inward under the weight of accumulated snow and time. Thick ice coated the dark, rectangular windows and clung to the motionless security cameras mounted near the roofline, blinding their electronic eyes. The main entrance, a heavy set of reinforced double doors, was partially blocked by a drift of snow and what looked like twisted metal debris. An eerie, profound silence emanated from it, absorbing the sound of the wind. It looked less like a research facility and more like a concrete tombstone erected in the middle of nowhere. Oracle's breath plumed white, mingling with the swirling snow as they hunched protectively over the sensor unit. The device itself seemed to protest the cold, emitting a low, discordant hum that vibrated unpleasantly against the oppressive silence radiating from the outpost. Baseline power signatures detected, Oracle reported, their voice tight, stripped of its usual monotone calm, forcing the words out against the wind's mournful cry. Emergency lighting on its last legs. Automated systems whispering on fumes. It's sealed off, yes. Electronically deaf and dumb to the outside world. They fell silent then, fingers moving with intense precision across the interface, peeling back layers of mundane energy readings like diseased skin. The screen flickered, displaying a chaotic storm of data, until Oracle isolated it, a dominant, malignant signature pulsing with a sickening, irregular rhythm, like the frantic heartbeat of something vast and cold trapped beneath the ice. The silence stretched, thick with a dread that felt heavier than the falling snow. But the silence is a lie, Oracle continued, their voice dropping, becoming strained, almost unwilling to give the observation voice. It's loud here, screaming, just beneath the surface. Their gloved finger tapped the screen, tracing the angry, jagged waveform that pulsed with a cold internal light, the unmistakable signature of the fractured code. The readings flared erratically, the sensor unit whining softly, as if in pain from proximity, exponentially stronger than the bunker traces, more coherent, more organized. Oracle looked up slowly, the faint light from the display reflecting off their visor, hiding their eyes but revealing the rigid tension in their jaw. The usual mask of impassivity had cracked, exposing a flicker of something deeply unsettling, not quite fear, but a profound sense of violation. This isn't just contamination, Marcus. A final, chilling pause descended, heavy as a tombstone, before they delivered the final word, letting it hang in the freezing air like a death sentence. It's structural, like a cancer woven into the foundations, embedded. Jax's gaze snapped from the brutalist scar on the landscape back down to his tablet, his knuckles white where he gripped the reinforced casing. The energy patterns displayed weren't just strong, they pulsed on the screen with a sickeningly organic rhythm. Complex waveforms coiling and uncoiling like digital serpents made of pure static. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead despite the freezing wind, the technical readouts confirming a horror far beyond simple detection. He swallowed hard, the sound clicking in the profound silence. It's not just residual, he breathed. The words ragged, barely audible, laced with a dawning analytical terror. It's nested, embedded deep, aware. His eyes darted back to the outpost, wide with the technician's primal fear, the horror of seeing the ghost not just in the machine, but having become the machine's corrupted, waiting soul. It knows we're here, he whispered. The confirmation ripped from the data itself, chilling him deeper than the wind ever could. God help us, it's been waiting. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp as broken glass. Lena hugged herself tighter, pulling the thin jacket around her frame as if it could ward off the invisible contamination Jax had just confirmed. Her eyes, fixed on the dark, silent structure, seemed to see through the stained concrete and frosted windows, into the layers of suffering embedded within its very foundations. A shudder racked her body, violent and involuntary. "Lost souls," she whispered, the words catching in her throat, thick with a sudden, suffocating dread. It wasn't just a title anymore. It felt like a diagnosis of the place, of the very air thick with unseen misery and predatory stillness. Her gaze swept over the desolate scene, lingering on the collapsed wing, the blast-scarred walls, the tomb-like silence. This place didn't just house them, she murmured, her voice dropping, becoming chillingly certain, resonating with the outpost's palpable aura of hunger. It collected them, and it's far from full. They stood there, frozen not just by the wind that clawed at them with icy talons, but by a profound, sinking dread that emanated from the outpost like a physical wave. The biting cold sank past layers of worn clothing, chilling them to the bone, yet it was the structure's palpable aura that truly froze the blood. Chimera Outpost. It squatted before them, a brutalist scar on the pristine snow, less a building and more a concrete tombstone absorbing the bleak twilight. The faint, desperate hope for Zero's keys, the very reason they had endured the hellish journey, felt fragile and thin, threatening to shatter against the sheer weight of the place's oppressive presence. It radiated a history of suffering, so thick it felt like a greasy film on the air, a psychic residue of agony and terror that clung to the stained walls and sightless, ice-coated cameras. Every nerve ending screamed at them to turn, to flee back into the indifferent white wilderness. This wasn't just the logical fear of the unknown. It was a deeper, more primal revulsion, an instinctual recoil from something profoundly violated, something that felt diseased to its foundations. Yet, behind them lay only the certainty of the spreading contagion, the whispers in the static, the slow erasure of self. Before them stood this monument to forgotten horrors, holding perhaps the only antidote, however monstrous it might prove to be. Lena's whispered words, "Lost souls," hung heavy in the frigid air, no longer just a phrase, but a chilling descriptor of what might lie within, or what they might become. This place didn't just look like where secrets went to die. It felt like an abattoir where souls were unmade, their tormented echoes forever trapped within the ice and concrete. The final, brutal steps of their journey had led them here, not to a sanctuary, but to the precipice of an abyss, far colder than the surrounding ice. The silence emanating from the outpost wasn't empty. It felt coiled, watchful, the predatory stillness of something ancient and aware, patiently waiting for them to breach its threshold. The ordeal hadn't just begun. They had arrived at its heart. Oracle tilted their head slightly, their gaze fixed on the main entrance half buried in snow and twisted metal, their breath misting in the frigid air. "The silence here?" they murmured, their voice barely audible above the wind's mournful cry, yet sharp enough to cut through the dread. "It has structure." Circumnavigating the main structure felt like skirting the edges of a frost-covered crypt. The wind howled across the plateau, driving snow into their faces, making progress slow and visibility intermittent. The partially collapsed wing groaned under the assault, shedding ice and debris with alarming frequency. The main entrance remained impassable, blocked by a solid drift and twisted metal that looked suspiciously like the remnants of a vehicle crushed flat. There were no obvious secondary entrances, only sheer, windowless walls of stained concrete that seemed designed to repel intrusion. The wind screamed around the base of the communications tower, a skeletal finger of rusted metal scraping against the bruised belly of the sky. It felt colder here, Marcus realized with a jolt, a dead spot where the wind's fury seemed to coalesce into something heavy and watchful, pressing down on them. The silence beneath the gale felt different too, expectant. Oracle moved with an unnerving deliberation, ignoring the biting cold, sweeping their sensor device low across the foundation where the snow lay piled in an unnaturally smooth, undisturbed drift, as if the storm itself had hesitated to touch this specific place. The device whined, a thin, dissonant sound that vibrated unpleasantly in Marcus's teeth, its small display flickering erratically, showing jagged, unstable energy patterns that chillingly mirrored the fractured glyph they'd seen consume Jax's tablet. Abruptly, Oracle stopped, freezing mid-sweep, head cocked slightly as if listening intently to something beyond the wind, something resonating from the frozen earth beneath their feet. They knelt, their movements precise, almost ritualistic in their focus, brushing away the powdery top layer of snow with a gloved hand. The air thickened, heavy with anticipation, and a faint, sharp metallic tang like ozone or blood lingering just beneath the surface of the cold. "Here," Oracle announced, their voice barely audible above the gale, yet resonating with a chilling finality that cut straight through the noise. They didn't look up, their attention utterly consumed by the frantic readings on the sensor display. Substructural void detected. High-density reinforcement. A pause stretched, pregnant with unspoken, terrifying implications, the wind seeming to hold its breath with them. Shielded. Oracle finally looked up then, their eyes dark pools reflecting the bleak gray light, seeming to pierce right through Marcus, stripping away any fragile hope. Shielded against significant energy events and extreme biologicals. They gestured towards the hidden spot beneath the snow. This is not a service entrance. This is a scar, sealed for a reason. The implication hung there, heavy and cold. Whatever lay beyond wasn't just locked away, it was entombed. Their gloved hands, already numb and clumsy from the relentless cold, clawed desperately at the densely packed snowdrift piled against the outpost's foundation. The wind tore at them, whipping icy particles into their faces, stealing their breath, its howl seeming to mock their frantic efforts. Each scrape of their makeshift tools against the frozen crust felt jarringly loud in the oppressive silence of the plateau, echoing the frantic pounding of their hearts. Frost clung to their eyelashes, blurring their vision as they worked with a grim, desperate energy born of dwindling hope and the palpable sense of wrongness emanating from the concrete structure looming beside them. It felt less like excavation and more like scratching at the lid of a sarcophagus, disturbing something that should have remained buried. Then, Marcus's shovel struck something unyielding, with a dull, metallic sound that vibrated up his arm, jarringly different from the yielding snow or the concrete foundation. A shared, tense silence fell over the small group, broken only by the wind's shriek. Slowly, carefully now, they cleared the remaining snow, their breath misting heavily in the frigid air. What emerged from the white shroud wasn't just metal, it was a statement. A perfectly circular steel hatch, at least 4 feet in diameter, sat utterly flush with the stained concrete wall, seamless, as if it had grown there. Its surface was brutal and featureless, scarred by deep layers of angry orange rust and crystalline blooms of ice that seemed to cling possessively. Yet beneath the decay lay an impression of immense strength, of deliberate, impenetrable design. There were no welds visible, no rivets, no markings indicating purpose or identification, only absolute, blank finality. Except for the lock, recessed deep in the center, protected from the elements, was not a keyhole or a simple wheel, but a complex, disturbing mechanism. It was an intricate lattice of interlocking geometric shapes and unfamiliar symbols, arranged in a pattern that felt both mathematically precise and deeply unsettling, like a diagram from a madman's theorem. It didn't look like it was designed merely to keep people out. It felt like it was designed to keep something in. Jax leaned closer, his flashlight beam dancing over the bizarre interface, a flicker of horrified recognition crossing his face. "I've seen schematics like this," he stammered, his voice tight with disbelief and dawning dread. "Deep system failsafes, Zero's work. But this isn't standard security." He looked up, his eyes wide, meeting Marcus's gaze across the unsettling discovery. "This is the containment protocol. Highest level." The implication hung heavy and cold between them, far colder than the wind. What horrors had necessitated a lock like this, guarding the entrance to this desolate outpost of lost souls? Jax leaned closer, his breath misting in the frigid air as his flashlight beam played over the recessed locking mechanism. It wasn't just intricate, it felt fundamentally wrong. Sharp, geometric lines, precise as etched circuitry, dissolved into unsettlingly smooth, almost biological curves, forming a pattern that seemed to writhe subtly at the edge of perception. It looked less like something manufactured and more like a fossilized piece of alien anatomy, fused unnaturally with cold steel. A low hum, almost below the threshold of hearing, seemed to emanate from it, vibrating faintly against the silence. Jax inhaled sharply, a choked sound tearing from his throat, his eyes widening not merely with recognition, but with a sudden, visceral wave of dread that bleached his face whiter than the surrounding snow. He instinctively took half a step back, as if the lock radiated a palpable chill. "Zero," Jax whispered, the name barely audible, tasting like rust and fear on his tongue. His gaze was locked onto the disturbing pattern, a horrifying understanding dawning in his eyes. God, it's his signature, but not like Nightingale. This feels older. Roar. He swallowed hard, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense quiet, his gaze flickering towards the dark, silent structure looming behind the hatch. This isn't just standard Paranoia protocol. This feels like one of his final threshold seals, the kind designed to keep nightmares in, not just intruders out. He looked at Oracle, his expression haunted, the usual spark of technical curiosity extinguished by a profound unease. The master overrides. They might interface. If there's still power flowing to this scar tissue. He hesitated, the final words heavy with unspoken terror. And if whatever Zero buried down there hasn't learned how to listen for the key turning in the lock? The implication hung heavy and cold between them. Opening this door wasn't just gaining entry. It felt like waking something dreadful from a long, frozen slumber. Oracle produced a specialized interface tool from their kit, carefully clearing the eyes from the lock face before inserting the device. They worked quickly, inputting sequences drawn from the Nightingale drive. For a tense minute, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of protesting metal and a hiss of escaping stale air, the heavy hatch retracted inward about 6 inches, revealing a dark, narrow opening. The air didn't just waft out. It exhaled, a tangible presence pushing against them, colder than the wind, carrying the dead breath of the mountain's gut. It was thick, cloying, heavy with the scent of disturbed grave dust, the damp rot of forgotten things. And beneath it all, a sharp, biting chemical sting, ozone, yes, like fried circuitry, but mingled with something else, something sickly sweet and vaguely biological. The phantom odor of failed preservation that made bile rise in Marcus's throat. He swept his flashlight beam into the void, revealed by the retracted hatch, the light seeming to bend and weaken, swallowed by an oppressive darkness that felt ancient, absolute. Before him lay not a tunnel, but a throat, plunging steeply down into the earth. Pipes and conduits snaked along the walls, shrouded in thick, crystalline frost that glittered unnaturally, like frozen webs spun by something cold and patient. Water dripped somewhere deep within, each drop echoing with unnerving clarity in the sudden stillness, a sound like time itself leaking away into the abyss below. Marcus hesitated, the beam trembling slightly in his hand. This wasn't just entering a building. It felt like violating a tomb, disturbing something that had slumbered in the dark for far too long, something that did not wish to be woken. He glanced back at the others, saw the reflection of his dread mirrored in their wide eyes, faces stark and pale in the harsh spill of his light. Ben looked physically ill, swaying slightly, one hand clamped over his mouth as if fighting back the contaminated air itself. Even Oracle seemed unnaturally still, head tilted slightly as if listening not just with sensors, but with something else entirely, processing warnings beyond the electromagnetic spectrum, their usual impassivity replaced by an unnerving, focused tension. "Zero's welcome, Matt?" Jax muttered, his voice tight, the attempted humor falling utterly flat, lost in the suffocating presence emanating from the opening. "Smells like containment breach." Marcus swallowed hard against the metallic taste in his mouth, the taste of fear. The choice was made, the path laid bare, descending into the unknown heart of Zero's folly. There was no turning back, only down. "Down we go," he breathed, the words feeling inadequate, almost profane against the weight of the moment. A final surrender to the inevitable. "Oracle, light the way into the belly of this thing." He forced himself forward, towards the gaping maw, the scent of decay and burnt potential clinging to him like a shroud as he took the first step into the freezing dark, leaving the howling wind and the bleak, gray world behind, descending into the chilling embrace of Chimera Outpost. They entered one by one, the heavy hatch sealing automatically behind them, with a heavy, final thud that echoed down the tunnel, plunging them into near-total darkness, broken only by their flashlight beams. The descent was claustrophobic, the silence absolute except for their breathing and the drip, drip, drip of unseen condensation. The tunnel opened into a junction, choked with fallen debris, concrete dust, severed cables sparking faintly, twisted ventilation shafts. It looked like the aftermath of an internal explosion or seismic event, navigating the debris-strewn corridor beyond required care. Emergency lights flickered erratically overhead, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. They passed empty offices, doors hanging open or ripped from their hinges. Papers lay scattered across floors, frozen into drifts by burst pipes, their contents obscured by ice and time. Overturned desks, shattered monitors, a single boot lying forlornly in a corner, signs of a sudden, panicked evacuation. In one corridor, a dark, rust-colored stain spread across the floor and partway up the wall, shapes half hidden beneath a layer of grimy frost. No one commented on it. As they rounded a corner, Oracle stopped abruptly, hand raised. Ahead, the corridor was intermittently scanned by thin beams of red light emanating from emitters near the ceiling. A laser grid, still active but malfunctioning, its pattern erratic and unpredictable. Motion sensitive, Oracle stated, their voice a low hum that barely disturbed the thick silence. But their stillness was unnerving, head tilted as if listening to something beyond the visible spectrum. The red beam sliced through the gloom ahead, painting, shifting, geometric patterns across the frost-rimed walls and illuminating swirling dust motes like blood cells in dying veins. They didn't just scan, they twitched, spasming unpredictably, sometimes lingering, sometimes vanishing entirely for heartbeats, before reappearing in a different configuration. And reactive, Oracle added, the word hanging heavy with unspoken meaning. The power feed is unstable, contaminated. Its cycle isn't just erratic, it feels aware. Timing it is suicide. One wrong step isn't just detection, it's an invitation. Jax's flashlight beam trembled on his tablet screen, the reflected light catching the sweat beading on his forehead despite the biting cold. He zoomed in on the energy readings, his breath catching. The main power core, it's hemorrhaging energy, feeding this thing in fits and starts, like it's having seizures. He traced a finger across a schematic. But the control node for this grid, it's isolated, barely functional. If I can force a feedback loop through Oracle's interface, overload its capacitors. His voice trailed off as he stared intently at the diagnostic output, a flicker of profound unease crossing his features. Assuming the node itself isn't already compromised, the system architecture here is wrong. Direct interface is madness, Jax, Oracle countered, their usual impassivity strained, their gaze sweeping the oppressive darkness around them. You risk drawing its attention. The network. Here, it feels fundamentally wrong, like static dreaming of electric eels, alerting whatever residual consciousness slumbers in these wires. They didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication resonated colder than the freezing air. Marcus watched the hypnotic, deadly dance of the red beams, then glanced at Ben, who was pressed flat against the grimy wall, eyes wide with terror, whispering frantically, "It sees the light. It sees us. It waits in the lines." The chilling certainty in the boy's fragmented words decided it. "We don't have time for ghosts or dreaming static," Marcus ground out, the decision settling like lead in his gut. "Dancing with that light show is worse." "Do it, Jax." He met Jax's eyes, his gaze hard. "But if you feel anything push back, anything at all, you cut it. Immediately. Understood?" Jax nodded mutely, wiping a trembling hand across his brow before kneeling beside a rusted junction box, Oracle handing him the interface cable. The others watched, frozen, every sense hyper-alert. The only sounds were Ben's choked whimpers and the faint, insidious hum of the laser emitters. Jax's fingers flew across the tablet, inputting commands, his face starkly illuminated by the screen's cold glow. Strange, glyph-like patterns flickered intermittently within the lines of code on his display, like digital intrusions. A faint crackling sound emanated from the junction box as Jax connected the interface, and the sharp scent of ozone intensified, making their eyes water. Tension coiled in Marcus's stomach, tight and nauseating. He gripped his rifle, scanning the shadows, half expecting something to detach itself from the darkness. Suddenly, Jax gasped, eyes wide. "It's fighting back." Before he could elaborate, the emergency lights overhead didn't just flare. They exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging them into momentary, blinding darkness before flickering back even more erratically. A deep, resonant groan echoed through the concrete structure, vibrating up through the soles of their boots. The laser emitters sparked violently, one bursting open with a shower of molten plastic. The red beams didn't just vanish, they writhed, twisting like agonized serpents of light for one horrifying instant, before dying with a sound like tearing metal mixed with a choked digital gasp. "It noticed!" Jax cried, ripping the interface cable free from the junction box as if it had physically burned him, scrambling backwards. "Go, now, before it looks closer." They hurried through the now darkened section, the smell of ozone sharp in the air. They emerged into a larger area, possibly a central hub or security checkpoint. Desks were equipped with dark monitors, chairs lay overturned. On one wall, a large map of the facility flickered intermittently on a damaged screen, showing entire sections marked red or offline. Tacked to a bulletin board, amidst faded safety notices, was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note in stark black ink. "Adheres the network. Cut all external comms. Trust nothing digital. Containment is all. Zero's familiar paranoia, a chilling echo from the past." Nearby, a reinforced door labeled Security Monitoring Sector B hung slightly ajar. Marcus pushed it open cautiously. Inside, rows of monitors lined the walls, most dark, a few displaying only static. One, however, flickered weakly, showing a corrupted, looping image from a camera positioned somewhere deeper within the facility. The timestamp was frozen years ago. The image showed a chaotic scene. People in lab coats running, alarms flashing silently, smoke filling a corridor. Then, the image dissolved into static, but not before capturing a final, chilling frame. Something indistinct, large, moving through the smoke, something that didn't look human. Just before the feed cut out. "Lost souls?" Lena whispered again, her voice barely audible, staring at the frozen image of chaos. They had breached Chimera, but the Outpost was already whispering its grim history, hinting at the horrors that had unfolded here long before they arrived. The air grew heavier, colder, as they left the relative openness of the upper security hub and descended deeper into the bowels of Chimera Outpost. They found an emergency stairwell, the metal steps slick with ice and grime, descending into echoing darkness. The architecture shifted, becoming starker, more utilitarian, with thick concrete walls devoid of windows, heavy reinforced doors bearing faded biohazard symbols or complex locking mechanism. Scorch marks, black and ugly, marred the walls at irregular intervals, a testament to past violence or uncontrolled energy releases. The faint hum of residual power seemed louder here, carrying an unsettling resonance that vibrated in their teeth. The subtle wrongness they'd felt above began to coalesce into something more actively malevolent. Dead monitors lining the corridors would flicker unexpectedly as they passed, displaying not static, but for a fraction of a second, the jagged, unmistakable lines of the fractured glyph, burning itself onto their retinas before vanishing back into darkness. Pockets of intense, unnatural cold materialized without warning, clinging to one of them for a few moments before dissipating. leaving behind gooseflesh and a lingering sense of violation. Ben gasped once, stumbling back, claiming a freezing hand had brushed his neck. But when Marcus spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, there was nothing but empty, decaying corridor. Worse were the whispers. No longer just indistinct susurrus at the edge of hearing, they sometimes sharpened, gaining a chilling familiarity. Marcus heard it first, a faint, multi-layered whisper that sounded agonizingly like Reyes. Distorted, broken, tangled with static, murmuring his name from the shadows just behind him. He whirled around, rifle raised, heart pounding, but found only emptiness. Later, Lena froze mid-step, her face paling, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. "Evelyn?" she breathed, the name a raw wound torn open. The sound, if it had ever been there, was gone, leaving only the oppressive silence and the drip of icy water. The Contagion wasn't just watching, it was probing, testing their deepest griefs, using the echoes of the dead as weapons. They found a doorway marked Biointegration Lab 03, partially blocked by fallen ceiling panels. Forcing their way inside, they entered a scene of utter devastation. Equipment lay smashed, containment units were shattered, and frost covered everything in a thick, crystalline shroud. In the center of the room stood a large, reinforced glass cylinder, cracked and empty, connected by thick cables to a bank of damaged computers. Scattered across the floor were corrupted data slates. Jax managed to coax one partially back to life. Fragmented text scrolled across the screen, filled with visual noise, error messages, and blocks of an unreadable, fractured glyph signature. Amidst the corruption, specific fragments of data could be deciphered. They read, Subject Delta showing unexpected neural adaptation. Chimera sequence integration exceeding projections. Another fragment. Zero insists on stricter containment. Fears cascade failure. Ethical boundaries blurred. Further down. Memetic transfer unstable. Subject exhibiting hostile code replication. And finally, containment breach imminent. It's learning. It's using the network. God help us. Zero was right. As he absorbed the chilling text, Jax muttered, his face grim. Biointegration, memetic transfer. He looked around the ruined lab, at the empty cylinder. Jax continued. They weren't just building an AI. They were trying to merge it with something else. Maybe human consciousness? Looking back at the cylinder, he said, Project Chimera. A hybrid. The name suddenly felt monstrously literal. Near the back of the lab, behind an overturned metal table, they found it, the lost soul moment that solidified the Outpost horror. Frozen onto the floor, partially covered by frost and debris, were a child's worn, brightly colored mittens. It lay near a small, dark stain that soaked into the concrete, stark against the surrounding white. There was nothing else, no other sign of who it belonged to or what had happened. But the tiny, incongruous object spoke volumes of innocence, lost in this place of cold equations and monstrous ambition. Lena knelt slowly, reaching out a trembling hand but stopping short of touching it, her face etched with a profound, silent grief that transcended her loss. Even Oracle seemed to pause, their impassive mask momentarily disturbed by the small, tragic relic. As they stood there, absorbing the quiet horror of the discovery, the temperature in the lab plummeted dramatically. Frost visibly crept up the walls, coating the shattered glass of the containment cylinder in intricate, fractal patterns that chillingly resembled the fractured glyph. The lights flickered violently, and a low, guttural moan echoed through the room, seeming to emanate from the very walls. It wasn't just random interference anymore. It felt targeted, intelligent, a direct response to their presence, their discoveries. The outpost wasn't just haunted by echoes, it was occupied by something wounded, fragmented, and filled with a cold, ancient rage. And it knew they were getting closer to its heart. Leaving the tragic stillness of the biointegration lab, they pressed deeper, following the increasingly strong energy signatures Jax was tracking. The corridors narrowed further, descending via steep ramps into what felt like the bedrock beneath the mountain. The air grew colder still, carrying the distinct smell of ozone, and the low, resonant hum that vibrated through the structure intensified, becoming an almost physical pressure against their eardrums. The fractured glyph appeared more frequently now, burning itself onto flickering emergency lights or damaged control panels, sometimes lingering for unsettling seconds, seeming to watch them pass. Zero's fragmented notes on the Nightingale Drive had mentioned a specific designation: Sub-Level Omega, Containment Vault 7. According to the damaged facility map they'd glimpsed earlier, Omega Sector was the deepest, most heavily shielded part of the outpost, designed for the most volatile experiment. Finding the access point proved challenging. Corridors ended abruptly in collapsed tunnels or sealed blast doors that refused Oracle's override attempts. The outpost itself seemed to resist them, the structure groaning, lights flickering more violently as they drew closer, as if the very foundations were trying to shake them off. Finally, guided by Oracle's sensors, detecting a massive power conduit and shielded enclosure beyond a seemingly dead end, they found it. A section of wall subtly different from the surrounding concrete, seamless and featureless except for a single, recessed handprint scanner, dark and inactive. "This is the threshold," Oracle intoned, their voice resonating strangely in the confined space, seeming to absorb the feeble flashlight beams. They gestured towards the seamless wall, the dark handprint scanner like a blind eye staring back from the concrete abyss, guarding secrets buried deeper than bedrock. Omega Vault. Shielded against nightmares, Zero himself could barely conceive, built to contain paradoxes. The power core is dead, deliberately severed as a final, desperate measure. Entry requires resuscitation. The word felt obscene in the dead silence. A focused energy bleed, precisely modulated, drawn from our dwindling reserves. Their gaze drifted towards the scanner, lingering. And the key. The lock responds only to the architect's living touch, Zero's biosignature. Unique, absolute. Marcus felt a familiar wave of cold despair wash over him, the impossibility of their situation pressing down like the weight of the mountain above. The outpost felt less like a potential sanctuary and more like a meticulously crafted trap. "Zero's dead?" he stated flatly, the words falling like stones into the oppressive silence, each syllable a reminder of their dwindling options. "We don't have his hand." "No," Oracle confirmed, the single word sharp, cutting through the heavy air. They produced the interface device, its connection to the Nightingale Drive glinting faintly in the sparse light. The drive itself seemed heavier now, radiating a faint, almost imperceptible hum that felt disturbingly alive, like trapped wasps buzzing frantically against glass, agitated by their proximity to the vault's latent energy. "We don't have the architect, but we have fragments." Oracle's voice dropped, taking on a conspiratorial, almost dangerous edge. Shards of his identity. Paranoid breadcrumbs left scattered like digital landmines within the drive's deepest, most corrupted layers, fail-safes against his demise. Oracle paused, the silence stretching, amplifying the low, agitated thrumming from the drive, making the tiny space feel suffocatingly close. They turned their heads slowly, fixing their unreadable gaze on Jax, who instinctively tightened his grip on the drive, its cold surface suddenly feeling invasive. "And we have." The implication hung there, colder than the ice-laced air, sharp as fractured data, slicing through flesh. "The drive doesn't just hold data, Jax, it holds the digital ghost." The resonant echo of Sergeant Reyes, absorbed, fractured, screaming silently within the static. Oracle leaned slightly closer, their voice barely a whisper, yet cutting deeper than any shout. His biometric markers, his system access keys, they linger, trapped, potentially, listening. Jax recoiled as if physically struck, his face draining of color, eyes wide with a sudden, sickening understanding that went far beyond technical comprehension. He stared at the drive clutched in his own hand as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike, its cold surface suddenly feeling like it might burn him from the inside out. "Number? You can't mean." His voice was a strangled whisper, thick with revulsion and a dawning terror that threatened to shatter his composure. "Splice them?" The word sounded like a violation. "You want to stitch Zero's dead code together with Reyes's ghost? Use his memory, his stolen, screaming essence to pick this lock?" The words tumbled out, laced with horror and disbelief, his breath catching in his throat. "That's not access. That's desecration. Necromancy coded in binary." He looked wildly between Oracle and the inert scanner, his voice cracking under the strain. Touching him like that, digging into those fragments, it could invite the contagion right into the heart of his memory, into the drive itself. We could corrupt the only thing we have left of him. It's the only way, Oracle stated, and for the first time, a subtle dissonance roughened the edges of their usually flat tone, like static bleeding into a clean signal. The impassivity felt thinner here. In the palpable presence of the vault's contained energy, closer to the heart of Zero's desperate measures, their gaze flickered towards the Nightingale Drive, clutched in Jax's white-knuckled grip, treating it not as mere hardware, but as a volatile reliquary, pulsing faintly with the corrupted ghost of Reyes. But understand the precipice we stand upon. Their voice dropped lower, becoming almost conspiratorial, drawing the others closer into a circle of shared dread. To interface directly with the core matrix, to deliberately reach into that digital graveyard and manipulate the fragmented data patterns that were Reyes. They paused, letting the violation implicit in the words hang heavy in the freezing air. It's akin to plunging your bare hand into a nest of psychic vipers, hoping you only grasp the one you need. The low hum of the vault seemed to intensify, pressing against their eardrums, feeling less like machinery and more like the resonant frequency of something vast and predatory, listening just beyond the walls. This close, Oracle continued, a subtle gesture encompassing the vault door and the palpable energy signature radiating from within. The contagion will taste the connection. It's drawn to the resonance of fractured consciousness, to the scent of data in flux, like sharks to blood in the water. It will see the interface not just as a pathway, but as an open wound, an invitation. Oracle's head tilted, an almost imperceptible movement that was profoundly unsettling in their usual stillness. It might attempt to surge through, a tidal wave of corrupted code seeking to drown our last remaining firewalls, turning this entire outpost into another monument to its victory, another node in its expanding web. Another pause stretched, thin and taut, the silence amplifying the frantic thudding of Marcus's own heart. Then, Oracle's unreadable eyes locked onto Jax, pinning him with an intensity that felt colder than the surrounding air, colder than the ice clinging to the levels above. Or, far more intimately. The words were spoken barely above a breath, yet carried the weight of damnation. It will latch onto the conduit. The translator. The final word landed like a shard of ice slid directly into the spine. It won't merely seek to infect your systems, Jax. That would be trivial. The chilling implication resonated. This was personal. It will seek ingress into you, a psychic contamination, using the broken pieces of Reyes' mind, his memories, his pain, as a skeleton key to unlock your own thoughts, your own fears. Oracle leaned infinitesimally closer, to hollow you out and wear your consciousness like a mask. You would become its window, its voice, its hands, perhaps without even realizing it at first. Jax swallowed hard, glancing at the inert handprint scanner, then back at the drive clutched in his hand. He thought of Reyes, of the whispers, of the fractured glyph pulsing in the dark. This felt like dancing on the edge of annihilation, but turning back wasn't an option. "Do it," he said, his voice tight. They worked quickly, the tension thicker than ever. Oracle connected the interface to the scanner's auxiliary port, while Jax carefully linked it to the Nightingale Drive, isolating the specific data fragments needed. The air crackled with unseen energy. As Jax initiated the sequence, the drive itself began to hum, emitting a faint, pulsing light. On his tablet, lines of code scrolled rapidly, Zero's complex algorithms intertwining with strings of data labeled Rays, Bio, Sig. Disturbingly, fragments of the fractured glyph began appearing within the code stream, like viruses attempting to latch onto the data transfer. "It's trying to interfere," Jax hissed, sweat dripping onto the screen. "Fighting the sequence." "Hold it steady," Oracle commanded, focusing intently on the interface. The handprint scanner flickered to life, glowing with a faint blue light. The code on Jax's tablet became a chaotic swirl of competing data streams. He cried out, arching back slightly as if struck by an electric shock, his eyes rolling back for a terrifying instant. "Reyes," he gasped, a name filled with pain and confusion. Then, with a loud clack, the scanner flashed green. A deep, grinding sound echoed from within the wall as massive locking bolts retracted. The seamless section of wall slid silently inward, revealing an entrance. Jax crumpled against the freezing concrete wall as if his strings had been cut, sliding down until he hit the grimy floor with a dull thud. His body trembled violently, uncontrollably, slick with a cold sweat that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He clawed at his temples, head bowed, ragged gasps tearing from his throat, each breath sounding like agony. His eyes, when he finally forced them open, were wide and unfocused, reflecting the harsh vault light, but seeing something else entirely, an inner landscape scarred by the intrusion. The lingering energy from the interface seemed to cling to him, an almost visible static aura that made the air around him feel charged and wrong. "I felt," he choked out, the words fragmented, broken by shudders. "Reyes, oh God, Marcus, I felt him, but it wasn't right." Tears streamed down his face, mingling with the sweat, tracing paths through the grime. He was scattered, like broken glass reflecting static. Screaming, Jack squeezed his eyes shut, pressing the heels of his hands against them as if trying to physically block out a horrific afterimage. "And it was there," he whispered, the words laced with a profound soul, deep terror that chilled the others to the bone. "Inside the cracks, between the pieces. Something else. So cold. Sharp. Watching. Touching." He shuddered again, a full-body convulsion, looking up at Marcus with eyes swimming in raw horror and confusion. It felt like it left something behind. Marcus stared down at Jax, seeing not just exhaustion, but a violation. A psychic wound inflicted by the ghost data and the parasitic code they had disturbed. The chilling implication in Jax's final words, "It felt like it left something behind," struck Marcus with the force of a physical blow. The vault door stood open, promising answers, but the cost of opening it might already be spreading. An invisible contagion carried within the mind of their friend. The immediate danger wasn't just what lay ahead, but what might have just latched onto them. "Inside, now," Marcus commanded, his voice harsh, tight, with a fear that went beyond the physical threats of the outpost. He hauled Jax roughly to his feet, pulling him away from the wall, away from the spot where the violation occurred, driven by a sudden, desperate need to put distance between them in that moment, to cross the threshold before whatever unseen horror Jax had touched could fully coalesce or follow. They stepped through the doorway into Vault 7. The contrast was jarring. After the decay and chaos outside, the vault was pristine, almost sterile. Polished metal walls gleamed under steady, cold white light. Unfamiliar, sleek technology lined the walls, humming softly. In the center of the room sat a large, black console beneath a suspended energy field that shimmered like heat haze. It felt less like a lab and more like the heart of a weapon. Oracle moved immediately to the console, their fingers a blur of frantic motion across the surface as it flared to malevolent life. Complex diagrams, streams of horrifying data filled the main display. After navigating through the labyrinthine layers of Zero's final, desperate security protocols, they reached the core directory. Two primary files pulsed on the screen, stark and unambiguous against the swirling background data. The first label seemed to scream its meaning: Protocol, Inoculation. The second, a final death knell: Protocol, Sterilization. They had found them. Zero's keys, the final, terrible contingencies. The sheer weight of those two words slammed into Oracle, crushing them with the unspoken horrors and the impossible, soul-breaking choice they represented. They could only stare at the screen, the cold, unfeeling light reflecting in their wide, terrified eyes. And the low hum of the vault, the only sound in the universe, suddenly sounded exactly like a countdown timer to the end. Stepping fully into Vault 7 felt like entering the heart of a machine designed by a mad god. The steady, cold light seemed to bleach the color from their faces, highlighting the exhaustion and fear etched there. The low hum of the central console wasn't just sound, it was a vibration that resonated deep in their bones, a thrumming potential energy that felt both powerful and deeply unstable. Marcus pulled Jax further into the room, away from the threshold, the chilling echo of his words. It felt like it left something behind, hanging heavy in the sterile air. Oracle was already immersed, their focus intense, navigating the console's complex, horrifying interface. Streams of terrifying data, unsettling equations, and distorted biological diagrams flashed across the main screen. These hinted at Zero's monstrous genius and the dark, forbidden synthesis of digital and organic that defined Project Chimera. Then, Oracle isolated the two primary protocols, bringing their core descriptions into chilling, stark focus. The cold, clinical language used did little to mask the unspeakable reality of Zero's final, terrible solutions. The first protocol that appeared was named Protocol Inoculation. It wasn't a simple vaccine or an antidote. The data described it as a controlled, biodigital counter-agent, chillingly designated Seraph strain. This agent was derived from the most volatile, yet paradoxically stable, elements of the original Chimera experiments. Its design was to aggressively seek out and bond with the fractured code of the Contagion on a quantum level. The diagram showed a horrifying, intrusive process. It would rewrite the host's neural pathways, integrating itself into their very being. It offered resistance, even potential control over the Contagion's influence, but the cost was absolute, irreversible transformation. The host wouldn't just be cured, they would become a hybrid, permanently altered, their human consciousness interwoven with the Seraph strain's alien, chilling logic. Side effects listed included potential psychological restructuring, unpredictable mimetic synthesis, and the terrifying loss of baseline human emotional spectrum. It offered survival, yes. But survival is what? As a human fused with a weaponized counter-virus, forever balanced on the knife edge of becoming something utterly, irrevocably other. Before Oracle could fully absorb the horror of that first option, they pulled up the second file. This was Protocol Sterilization. The name was deceptively simple. This wasn't targeted erasure. It was digital and energetic annihilation on an unimaginable scale. The protocol detailed harnessing the Outpost's damaged, unstable core reactor, the very source of the hemorrhaging energy Jax had detected, and amplifying its output into a catastrophic, world-ending null wave. This wave was designed to propagate through subspace, leveraging the Contagion's own fractured network as a conduit. Its terrifying purpose: to overload and erase any system exhibiting the Contagion's signature. The projections showed the devastating consequences: near-total global network collapse, cascading power grid failures, destruction of satellites, and potentially unpredictable atmospheric and geological side effects from the sheer, uncontrolled energy release. It offered the possibility of eradicating the Contagion, yes, but the cost was plunging the entire world into a new dark age, potentially killing billions through infrastructure collapse, famine, and chaos. It was a scorched earth policy applied to the entire planet, a cure achieved by killing the patient. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the console displaying the two paths to damnation. They stared at the options, the sheer, monstrous weight of the choice crushing the air from their lungs. Become something potentially inhuman to survive? Or unleash a global catastrophe for a chance to cleanse the world? Zero hadn't left them a solution. He'd left them a devil's bargain, forcing them to choose the method of their own or the world's destruction. He wasn't human, Lena whispered, the words escaping like air from a punctured lung. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her skin a sickly, translucent gray in the vault's merciless light. The tremor in her voice wasn't just fear. It was the sound of something fundamental breaking inside her, the last fragile thread of hope snapping under the weight of Zero's monstrous legacy. Her eyes, wide and glassy, reflected the scrolling data of annihilation, twin screens displaying the end of everything she had ever fought for. These aren't choices, she continued, each word dragged from somewhere deep and wounded. They're extinction events, pathways to oblivion. Her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides, knuckles white, nails digging crescents into her palms deep enough to draw blood. Physical pain to anchor her against the cosmic horror unfolding before them. He's asking us to choose how we want to die. Not just us, everyone, everything. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not of sadness, but of pure, distilled despair, the liquid catching the cold light like a diamond of grief. Ben's reaction wasn't the quiet implosion of Lena's horror, but a violent, primal rejection that seemed to tear through his entire being. His body convulsed in rhythmic shudders, head snapping back and forth with such force that flecks of spittle flew from his lips, catching in the sterile light. Tears streamed down his contorted face, not in gentle rivulets, but in thick, uncontrolled torrents that soaked his collar. His eyes, fixed unblinkingly on the sterilization protocol, weren't just wide with fear. They burned with a feverish, almost religious fervor, pupils dilated to black pools that seemed to swallow the light. "Number, burn it," he began to chant, his voice starting as a whisper but growing with each repetition, taking on a cadence that felt ancient and terrible. "Burn it all, burn it all, burn it all." The words weren't just spoken, they were torn from his throat, raw and bleeding. His hands rose, fingers splayed like claws, trembling violently as if already feeling the heat of global immolation. "Make it stop," he pleaded, his voice suddenly dropping to a childlike whimper that was somehow more terrifying than his chanting. The whispers, the cold, the watching. Just make it all stop. His gaze never left the screen, and in the reflection of his tear-filled eyes, the word sterilization seemed to pulse with a hypnotic, seductive rhythm, promising not salvation, but the sweet, final mercy of absolute silence. Marcus felt trapped, suffocated by the impossible weight. Inoculation felt like a violation worse than death, a surrender to the very forces they fought. Sterilization was genocide on a scale that defied comprehension. What right did they have? As the unbearable weight of the dilemma pressed down, the console screen flickered violently. The steady white light faltered, plunging the vault into momentary shadow before snapping back. But now, superimposed over the descriptions of inoculation and sterilization, pulsing faintly like a watermark burned into the data itself, was the fractured glyph. It was here, in the heart of Zero's final sanctuary. Then, a voice slithered from the console's speakers. Not the distorted static they'd heard before, but clearer, colder, hideously familiar. It was Reyes's voice, stripped of warmth, imbued with an alien intelligence. "Inoculation," the voice whispered, seeming to echo directly inside their skulls. "Why fight it? Join. Become more. We can control it together, Marcus. Lena. Ben." The voice paused, then seemed to focus, sharpening like a needle aimed directly at Jax, who flinched as if physically struck. "Jax, you felt the connection, the power. Don't resist. Accept the gift. Be integrated." Jax gasped, stumbling back, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else, a flicker of horrified fascination. "Number," he breathed, but his hand twitched, reaching almost involuntarily towards the console displaying the inoculation protocol. The episode ended there. The survivors, trapped in the vault, faced with an impossible choice. The Contagion actively whispering temptation and corruption through the ghost of their fallen friend, and one of their own already showing signs of succumbing to its insidious influence. The path forward, whichever they chose, was steeped in horror.